The day I realized my life would never be the same started with a celebration I didn't want to attend. My husband, Jason, was grinning ear to ear, holding a champagne glass, congratulating me as if I had just won some grand prize. "Finally, the perfect wife for me," he said with that smirk that always made me uneasy. On the surface, I laughed and clinked my glass with his, but inside, I felt a twinge of dread. I had always suspected he saw me as naive, fragile, and, most painfully, poor. My name is Victoria Hale, I'm 30 years old, and I had worked my way up as a financial analyst in one of the most competitive firms in New York. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't struggling either. I was independent, determined, and careful with every choice I made. I believed love and trust would be the foundation of my marriage, but Jason had other plans, and that became clear on our second anniversary. At first, everything seemed ordinary. We had met through mutual friends, and I had been swept off my feet by his charm. He showered me with attention, flattery, and small gestures that made me feel special. Friends envied our relationship. My parents warned me that he might be more interested in appearances than substance, but I brushed it off. I wanted to believe in love. But the truth came out subtly, almost too casually. One evening, while Jason was talking about our future, he let slip that he had been drawn to me because of what he thought I lacked in wealth. "I like knowing I can take care of you. You don't have a trust fund or family money, which makes this perfect," he said, laughing as if it were a harmless joke. That was the moment a chill ran down my spine. I pretended to laugh, nodded, and carried on with the evening, but that comment echoed in my mind for days. How could the man I married value me based on poverty? How could love be measured by what someone doesn't have? I didn't answer him then. I chose silence, observation, and patience, the perfect cover while I quietly discovered a truth he had no idea about. Because while he thought I was just a modest woman with no fortune, I was actually the sole heir to a hidden family estate, a secret trust that would make anyone's head spin. My grandparents had kept it a secret to teach me the value of hard work. No one, not even Jason, knew about the wealth that had been quietly growing in my name for decades. At home, I maintained the act of being content, unaware of his intentions. Jason, on the other hand, began to subtly exert control. He would suggest expensive dinners, helpful investments, and plans that made him seem generous, but in reality, it was all a test. He wanted to see how far he could push me, how much he could extract before I realized I held all the cards. Friends noticed the subtle changes too. They told me, "Victoria, don't you feel like he's calculating?" But I smiled, downplayed it, and continued my routine. I had learned early in life that appearances could be deceiving, and patience was often more powerful than confrontation. Even at work, I honed my skills, built my networks, and solidified my reputation. I was sharp, respected, and nobody questioned my competence. Jason believed he was in control, that he could manipulate me at will. Every smile I gave him, every nod of agreement, was carefully measured to conceal my growing understanding and determination. I also began quietly gathering information. Little by little, I watched his patterns, listened to his conversations, and noted his assumptions about my supposed naivety. It was fascinating to see how completely unaware he was of the truth. He thought I was a small, fragile woman, entirely dependent. Little did he know, the real Victoria was observing, planning, and waiting for the perfect moment. The turning point that first week came during a social gathering. Jason introduced me to some of his high-profile friends, brimming with pride. "She's so simple, so easy to impress," he whispered as he guided me toward a champagne glass. Everyone laughed at a joke he made about my humble background. I smiled, nodded, and kept quiet, but the gears in my mind were spinning. By the end of that night, I had made a silent promise to myself: if he believed he could manipulate me because of a mistaken idea of poverty, then I would make sure he understood exactly who I really was. But that would require time, patience, and precision. Revenge would not be rushed, it would be meticulously planned, and it would be unforgettable. And so began the first chapter of my double life, outwardly compliant, inwardly calculating. I would play the part of the innocent, dependent wife while quietly preparing for the moment when the tables would turn. Little did Jason know, he had underestimated me, and that would be his greatest mistake. The stage was set. The pieces were in motion. And in a world where money, power, and deception intertwined, I was about to reveal a side of myself he never saw coming. The weeks after that gathering felt like walking on a tightrope. Jason believed I was the naive, obedient wife he could mold to his liking. Every suggestion he made, every plan he pitched, I received with a polite nod, all the while noting every detail in my mind. I had learned long ago that the most dangerous person is the one underestimated. And Jason had made that fatal mistake. The first real warning sign came during a casual lunch at a new French bistro he wanted to impress me with. As we sat across from each other, Jason casually mentioned, "I think you'd be happier if we combined finances. You know, I could manage things better." His words were laced with charm, but I felt the sting behind them. It wasn't love, it was control masked as generosity. I smiled politely and said, "Maybe, someday," leaving the door just slightly open. But inside, I was already strategizing. If he wanted to believe I was dependent, I would allow him to. Every move, every gesture, every whispered suggestion from him became data I would use when the time came. Back at home, I began noticing small inconsistencies. Jason would casually bring up the idea of family favors or helping out old friends, always in a tone that suggested obligation. He seemed to assume that I would acquiesce, that I would bend to every request. I kept my expressions neutral, my mind quietly analyzing his every word. One evening, he invited his college friend, Hannah, over. Hannah was everything Jason admired, wealthy, polished, and confident. As they chatted, laughing over wine, I felt a pang of irritation but also clarity. He was testing me, showing me what he valued and what he didn't. And I realized then that his arrogance was my greatest ally. The more he underestimated me, the easier it would be to reclaim the power he thought he held. Over the next few days, small incidents escalated. Jason casually suggested I quit a freelance consulting project I loved, claiming it was distracting from our life together. He didn't realize how subtly he was pushing me into a corner, but I saw it clearly. He wanted me dependent, confined, manageable. I feigned agreement, pretending to weigh the decision seriously, but inwardly, I was preparing my counter. At work, my focus sharpened. I poured myself into projects with renewed intensity, attending late meetings and networking events while Jason assumed I was still the complacent wife. I watched him closely, noting how he spoke to others, the assumptions he made about my finances, and the way he flaunted influence as if it were power over me. Every arrogant word he uttered was a seed for the plan I was forming. Then came a turning point I hadn't anticipated. Hannah began to overstep. She would drop by unexpectedly, casually discuss investments with Jason, and even make subtle comments about my humble background. It was irritating, yes, but also revealing. She was arrogant, ignorant, and most importantly, oblivious to the truth about me. Every slip she made gave me insight into how they both underestimated me. One Friday night, while Jason and Hannah discussed a potential real estate investment in my presence, I let them continue, smiling softly, nodding politely, all the while cataloging every detail of their plan. They spoke of leveraging my supposed limited resources and assumed I would never contest them. Their arrogance filled the room, thick and almost tangible. By the end of the night, I knew it was time to make subtle moves. I began arranging my finances quietly, transferring certain assets into accounts only I controlled. Every document I touched, every meeting I attended, I made sure to leave no trace that could be traced back to my intentions. I was laying the groundwork for the day I would no longer be underestimated. Meanwhile, Jason continued to flaunt his sense of control. He casually mentioned plans to teach me about investments as if I were a child. I smiled, played along, and let him believe he was molding me. Little did he know, I was learning every lesson he taught, but on my terms, storing knowledge, contacts, and strategies for the moment when I would take the upper hand. The final straw came unexpectedly. Jason, in an attempt to impress Hannah, suggested we sell an inherited piece of my family's estate. He assumed I would hesitate, that I lacked the authority or insight to intervene. I laughed softly, a sound that seemed innocent, but inside, my mind raced. This was the perfect opening. The very estate he dismissed as worthless was actually a keystone of my hidden fortune. I allowed the conversation to drift, asking casual questions that feigned ignorance. Really? And you think selling it is best? I inquired softly. Jason, smug and confident, explained his reasoning, unaware that every word he spoke only strengthened my strategy. I had the evidence, the leverage, and the timing. All I needed was patience. By the time the evening ended, I had a clear understanding of the landscape. Jason's arrogance, Hannah's ignorance, and my hidden resources had created a perfect storm. I was no longer just a bystander in my own life. I had become the strategist, the quiet force waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The stage was set. The pieces were moving, and the tension was thick. Jason believed he controlled the game, but in reality, I was several moves ahead. Every gesture, every word, every small act of control he thought he wielded would soon unravel. And when it did, the consequences would be unforgettable. It all came crashing down one seemingly ordinary morning. I had just finished my morning coffee when Jason's phone buzzed incessantly on the kitchen counter. He glanced at it, smiled slyly, and excused himself to take the call in another room. Curiosity piqued, I tried to focus on my own tasks, but a nagging feeling told me this was more than a simple work call. Later that day, I discovered a series of text messages Jason had carelessly left open on the kitchen table. My heart sank as I read them, but at the same time, a cold clarity settled over me. The texts revealed his secret plan. He had married me thinking I was poor, intending to leverage my loyalty and humility to build his empire. Hannah, ever his partner in arrogance, was there for the scheming, laughing at the thought that I had no clue. Shock, disbelief, and rage coursed through me, but I kept my composure. I allowed the initial sting to wash over me like a cleansing fire, knowing that showing any emotion now would only give them the satisfaction they craved. Jason believed he had manipulated me, that I was blind to his true intentions. How wrong he was. I spent the next few days watching him more closely than ever. Every word, every smirk, every casual suggestion about finances and investments became a piece of a puzzle I was now determined to solve. He treated me as a naive, dependent wife, but inside, I was forming a plan so meticulous that he couldn't possibly see it coming. Hannah's role became increasingly clear. She had begun influencing his decisions, advising him on investments, and suggesting ways to use my supposedly limited assets. She didn't know I had access to the real accounts, the hidden properties, and the funds that Jason assumed I had no knowledge of. Their arrogance was a gift. The tension at home grew. Jason tried to control my daily routines, insisting I step back from certain activities he deemed too ambitious. I smiled, nodded, and played along, all while quietly consolidating my influence behind the scenes. Each time he tried to push me into dependency, I grew stronger, more resolute, and more patient. Then came the day of the ultimate betrayal. Jason and Hannah planned a weekend getaway, supposedly to celebrate our new ventures. They casually mentioned using funds from my hidden inheritance to pay for extravagant expenses. It was meant to be a show of power, A demonstration that they controlled not only the lifestyle but also the finances I had brought into the marriage. I let them speak, observing every detail, committing every transaction and word to memory. Their arrogance blinded them. I had already arranged my accounts so that I could access them remotely, ensuring that when the time came, I could reclaim what was rightfully mine without warning. The betrayal stung deeply. The realization that the man I had married not for love but for convenience, who had seen me as a pawn, and his accomplice, Hannah, had conspired against me, it all threatened to shake me to my core. But beneath the anger, a plan had begun to crystallize. I knew the moment of revenge would need precision, timing, and a cold, calculated hand. As the weekend approached, I maintained the facade of the compliant, unsuspecting wife. Every question, every laugh, every gesture reinforced their belief that I was naive, pliable, and utterly dependent. In reality, I was preparing every detail of their undoing. Every investment they boasted about, every reckless suggestion they made, was being documented, traced, and stored as evidence. When they finally left for their trip, thinking they had full control, I initiated the first moves of my counterattack. Transfers, account reviews, and subtle alerts were sent to ensure that every hidden asset was protected under my control. By the time they returned, confident and smug, the power dynamic had already shifted. Jason walked through the door, expecting adoration and compliance. Instead, he found a calm, collected, and unshakable presence, me. His confidence wavered slightly when he noticed the meticulous organization of my office, the detailed summaries of finances laid out as if anticipating his next move. Hannah, too, sensed the change, her carefree laughter now tinged with unease. The final confrontation hadn't even begun, yet the stage was perfectly set. I held all the cards. Every insult, every plan, every condescending word they had thrown my way had been catalogued, analyzed, and used to build a case for their reckoning. And soon, the reckoning would come, sharp and unrelenting. I allowed them to feel safe, thinking they had won, while secretly plotting their fall. Every casual chat about investments, every boastful remark, every attempt to belittle me was being used as ammunition. I had become the quiet storm, gathering force and ready to unleash it when the time was right. By the end of that week, I realized the depth of their underestimation. They had married and befriended someone they thought weak and uninformed, never imagining the layers of strategy I had quietly developed. The irony was delicious. Their confidence had become their blind spot, their hubris the very thing that would ensure my triumph. And as I closed my laptop that Friday evening, reviewing all the data I had meticulously gathered, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The betrayal had been shocking, yes, but it had also revealed the perfect path to justice. Jason and Hannah thought they had the upper hand, but in truth, the game had only just begun, and they were already losing. After gathering every piece of evidence, I finally felt the thrill of power coursing through me. Jason and Hannah had spent weeks underestimating me, assuming that I would quietly accept their manipulation and deceit. But I had been patient, calculating, and every move they had made was now a stepping stone toward their downfall. I started small. I reviewed every transaction, every document, and every careless note they had left in their arrogance. Each discrepancy, each unauthorized expense, each sly remark about my supposed ignorance became fuel for the plan I was about to execute. I meticulously mapped out their finances, tracing every hidden account, every luxury purchase, and every indulgence they thought would go unnoticed. Hannah had grown bolder, flaunting her influence over Jason, boasting about how easily they had manipulated me. Jason, blinded by confidence, continued to treat me as the compliant, naive wife. Every smile I gave, every casual chat I engaged in, was a performance, a mask hiding the storm I had been preparing. The turning point came when I discovered a critical error on their part. While they were meticulous in hiding their schemes, they had forgotten one key detail: using a company account for a personal luxury purchase, under their own names. That mistake became the keystone of my strategy. With this evidence, I could not only reclaim what was mine, but I could also publicly expose their audacity. I spent days preparing, rehearsing how I would reveal the truth. The confrontation had to be precise, undeniable, and humiliating enough to shake their confidence permanently. I arranged a dinner, inviting them under the guise of a celebration of our progress. They accepted eagerly, proud of the empire they thought they were building on my ignorance. As the evening arrived, I exuded calm control. Jason and Hannah entered, unaware that the stage had been set perfectly. I had prepared my laptop, printed copies of financial records, and organized every document to tell the story of their deceit. The room, dimly lit with soft music, gave the illusion of a casual evening. But beneath that tranquility, the tension was palpable. I was ready to unleash justice. I began with a simple conversation, asking about their recent purchases and investments. They boasted, as expected, detailing how they had handled the finances while I supposedly remained uninformed. I listened quietly, nodding occasionally, letting their arrogance build. Then, I started revealing my findings, calmly and methodically, showing screenshots, transactions, and receipts. Jason's smug smile faltered. Hannah's laughter died in her throat. The evidence was undeniable. Every claim they had made, every action taken without my consent, every manipulation, they had left a trail too conspicuous to deny. The power shift was immediate. Their confidence crumbled as they realized that the supposedly naive wife had outmaneuvered them at every step. I watched as Jason tried to recover, fumbling for explanations, but the weight of evidence left him speechless. Hannah attempted to intervene, her words hurried and defensive, but it was futile. Every accusation, every careless move they had made, was now on display in front of witnesses. Friends who had dined with us, colleagues who respected our work, all saw the truth unfold in real time. The satisfaction of witnessing their fall was intoxicating. They had underestimated me, believed themselves superior, and now, with meticulous planning and unwavering patience, I had turned the tables. Their empire of deceit crumbled in front of their eyes, replaced by the undeniable proof of their arrogance and betrayal. I concluded the evening with a statement that sealed their fate. You believed I was weak, uninformed, and easily manipulated. But every action, every careless boast, has been documented. And now, the truth is visible for all to see. The room fell silent, the magnitude of my control and their exposure leaving no room for denial. In the following days, the consequences took hold. Jason and Hannah faced formal inquiries within the company. Their credibility was destroyed, and their reckless decisions became grounds for legal and professional repercussions. Friends who had once supported their arrogance now turned to me, acknowledging the fairness and precision of my actions. I, on the other hand, emerged stronger than ever. The patience, strategy, and calm collectedness I had maintained through weeks of deceit positioned me as not just a survivor but a leader. The power dynamics had shifted irrevocably. The once dominant figures who had sought to exploit me were now powerless, their arrogance dismantled by my deliberate and intelligent approach. The sweet revenge was more than just reclaiming what was mine, it was a reclamation of dignity, authority, and self-respect. Jason and Hannah had learned, far too late, that underestimating someone based on appearances or assumptions is a grave mistake. The lesson, harsh but necessary, was as public as it was undeniable. By the end of this confrontation, I had proven to myself and everyone around that patience, strategy, and controlled action could overcome even the most audacious deception. The storm that had threatened my life and career was now subdued, its fury redirected toward a triumph that was both satisfying and empowering. I closed the chapter of their betrayal with a sense of finality. Every document, every piece of evidence, every meticulous calculation had played a part in a perfectly executed plan. Jason and Hannah had become cautionary tales of arrogance, while I emerged not just victorious, but transformed. The power that once seemed lost was reclaimed, and with it came a sense of liberation that was unmatched. The world now knew the truth. I was neither naive nor powerless. The wife they had underestimated was, in fact, the orchestrator of their downfall. And the lesson for anyone watching was clear: strength, intelligence, and patience can overturn even the most audacious schemes, turning betrayal into triumph. The aftermath of the confrontation was both swift and undeniable. Jason and Hannah, who had once acted with smug confidence, faced immediate consequences within Westfield Enterprises. The board launched a formal investigation, and their reckless actions, now documented in black and white, could not be ignored. Every embezzlement, unauthorized purchase, and deceitful maneuver came to light, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. Within days, their reputations crumbled. Colleagues who had once feared their arrogance began whispering about their downfall. Friends who had naively trusted them distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with people who had so blatantly betrayed both company and family. Legal inquiries were initiated, and the possibility of professional sanctions loomed large. The empire they thought untouchable was collapsing, brick by brick, all because they underestimated me. For me, Emily Grant, the experience was transformative. I felt a sense of liberation I had never known before. The fear, anxiety, and frustration that had shadowed my days were replaced with clarity, confidence, and a renewed sense of purpose. No longer the overlooked and underestimated wife, I now stood firmly in control of my life, career, and destiny. The office environment, once tense with subtle manipulations and hidden rivalries, gradually shifted. My colleagues and team members recognized the fairness and precision with which I had handled the situation. My leadership became respected, not just for my managerial skills, but for my ability to navigate treachery with intelligence and patience. Those who had doubted me now looked to me for guidance, and the dynamic of power had completely changed. Jason and Hannah, on the other hand, faced the consequences of their arrogance. Their financial irregularities were scrutinized, their positions terminated, and their social credibility shattered. The humiliation they experienced was a direct result of their own careless confidence. Watching them struggle to defend themselves while the evidence piled higher was a vindication unlike any other. The sweet justice of seeing their empire of deceit crumble was a moment of personal triumph I would never forget. With the dust settling, I took the time to reflect on what had transpired. The lesson was clear: appearances can deceive, and assumptions about someone's limitations can be fatal. My patience and strategy had not only protected me, but also revealed the truth in a way that no impulsive reaction could have achieved. I had turned betrayal into an opportunity, weakness into strength, and manipulation into empowerment. Life after the confrontation was not just about reclaiming what was mine, it was about embracing my own capabilities. I reinvested energy into my department, introduced new projects, and strengthened relationships with colleagues built on mutual respect rather than fear. The confidence gained from overcoming such a deeply personal challenge translated into sharper leadership, better decision-making, and a vision that others respected and followed. On a personal level, the experience reshaped my understanding of trust and self-worth. It was no longer just about being vigilant against deceit, it was about recognizing my own value and refusing to let others define my potential. Jason and Hannah's betrayal had been painful, but it revealed my inner strength and resilience. I had been underestimated, yes, but I had used that underestimation as a weapon, turning it into a story of triumph that would stay with me forever. Even months later, the memory of their downfall served as a reminder of the importance of patience and strategy. Quick reactions might satisfy momentary frustration, but true empowerment comes from understanding the situation fully, planning meticulously, and acting decisively. I became not just a survivor of manipulation, but a master of strategic response, someone whose actions commanded respect and whose intelligence could not be ignored. The story of Jason and Hannah also offered a broader lesson: never mistake kindness or discretion for weakness. People often exploit what they perceive as vulnerability, but strength can be subtle and strategic. By remaining calm, observant, and methodical, I turned the tables in a way that was both fair and decisive. The world learned that the underestimated wife was, in fact, the orchestrator of their comeuppance, a lesson that extended beyond personal revenge into professional and social realms. As for me, Emily Grant, I moved forward with a sense of renewal. I slept peacefully, invested confidently, and carried myself with a quiet authority that no one could challenge. The storm had passed, leaving behind clarity, control, and the satisfaction of justice achieved not through chaos, but through intelligence and resilience. In closing, the experience left me with a truth that resonates deeply: strength is not always loud, and revenge does not always come immediately. But when patience meets strategy, when observation meets action, the outcome can be both sweet and irreversible. Betrayal may hurt, but it can also reveal the depth of your own power, turning despair into triumph. And for everyone watching this story on A True Moment's Life, remember, never underestimate yourself, and never let others dictate your worth. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever turned a betrayal into a victory? Don't forget to subscribe to A True Moment's Life for more stories that reveal the hidden strength within ordinary lives. Every like, every share, and every comment helps keep these true stories alive and inspiring. Because sometimes, the people who think they hold all the cards are the ones who end up losing everything. And sometimes, the quietest, most underestimated person is the one writing the rules.